Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about hedging and a little bit about how liquidity pools work, just a high level overview. So we have non-linear payoffs as liquidity providers. Now, what does that mean? Well, a linear payoff is this. So if I'm holding an asset spot, I've got a linear payoff here. But if I deploy that same asset into a liquidity pool, I have this concave or negatively convex payoff. This is a non-linear payoff. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that I lose a little bit more to the downside in the LP position than I would if I was just holding that asset spot. And I make a little bit less to the upside if I'm in the LP position versus if I was just holding that asset spot. So you might be thinking to yourself, if you lose more to the downside and you make less to the upside, why in the world would you provide liquidity at all? Well, because of the fees. So that passive income, those fees, can greatly outweigh just holding an asset spot. So think about it this way. If I'm holding ETH and ETH moves sideways for a month, if I'm just holding it, I've made nothing. But if I'm in an LP position, I could have 10% or more in fees over that same 30-day period. So that's why it can be incredibly profitable to be an LP. But how do we make sure that we can hedge ourselves a little bit here? Because look, you've got this concave payoff as an LP. So to the downside, how do you hedge this downside risk? And how can you turn this concave payoff? How can you make it such that you have eliminated your delta risk? You have eliminated your directional risk, and now you're just in there earning fees. How do you do that? Well, you want to get to something like this, where you've hedged your downside and your risk at that point is just going out of range to the upside. So how do you generate something like this? Well, the guys over at Overnight Finance, Lucas, they've done a really good job of describing this strategy. And so what you do with this diagram here, what you do is you take a stable, you lend it on Aave or Moonwell or wherever, and then you borrow ETH or a volatile asset against it. And that act of borrowing against a stable, the act of borrowing is a classic short position. Now, why is it short? Well, if I borrow an asset, I profit if it declines in value
Hmm.
because then I can buy it back for less. So that spread, that's your profit. It's a classic short position. And if I take that borrowed ETH and I pair it with owned stables to create an LP position, and I'm earning yield on this LP position where half of my capital is borrowed ETH, then I'm delta hedged.
Mm.
I'm delta hedged in this position. So to the downside, if ETH declines, then the value of my LP position declines, but so does the value of my debt. So that equals it, that's your hedge right there. Now, to the upside, if the value of my LP position increases, well, so does the value of my debt. So what I've got to worry about here is a big move to the upside. And so how do I protect against that? Well, I've got to daily rebase my hedge. I've got to make sure that I don't get liquidated on this hedge. And so I've got a couple of ways to go about doing that. I can, like Overnight Finance does, I can keep a reserve of collateral assets in case there's a huge spike to the upside, or I can just be a little bit more active in rebasing my hedge and keep it at or above a 1.2 health factor. Yeah, I'm just going based on what OBN does, and they've been so successful with this strategy. So I'm just saying, hey, 1.2, that's the limit. I want to keep it above a 1.2.
Nice.
And yeah, this is how you would create a delta hedged or delta neutral position.
What's